Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Consumer Watchdog's Rage for Justice Report, our weekly conversation about the current issues we're exposing, confronting, and changing. As always, I'm your host, Carmen Balber, Executive Director of Consumer Watchdog. And my guest today is Amy Bach. She's the Executive Director of United Policyholders, an organization that has been helping consumers in California and across the country prepare for and recover from fires, floods, and other natural disasters. Make sure they get the insurance claims and benefits that they're entitled to. Nothing could be more timely, so I'm so glad you were able to be on, Amy.
Well, Carmen, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Of course, I'm a big fan of Consumer Watchdog, and we are very much comrades in raging for insurance justice. That's for sure.
Absolutely, for many a year. So everybody listening will know that we are in the middle of massive fires in California, including what has now been deemed the largest fire in California history. Increasing numbers of structures are being destroyed. And so I wanted to invite Amy on because she's the expert in advice to consumers on steps they should take to weather these firestorms, how to recover from wildfires, and get the insurance benefits that you're due. So maybe just start with the basics, Amy. What are the first steps after a fire that you that you give consumers?
So one of the first steps, we sort of bridge the practical tips about, how do you find a copy of your insurance policy? How do you find temporary housing? How do you get what kind of money is available to you under your insurance policy to get you situated in temporary housing? And we help people with there's just those practical things of okay, how do you get the debris removed and how do you pick yourself up off the emotional floor and start to deal with putting your life back together, which is the bridge between the practical and then the mindset is part of our early guidance. So we'll talk about the pragmatics of getting documents that were destroyed reconstructed, but then we will talk about your mindset early on as far as how people see insurance and help them very early understand that all the ads that they've seen about insurance are just ads. And there's no one's going to come from your insurance company with a magic wand and make everything right. And your adjuster may be friendly, but they're not your friend. So we have to very, very gently explain to people that insurance is a vehicle to get them back where they were before the loss, but it won't drive itself. And in fact, it's not at all. The process is not for most people like it's shown in ads. It's actually a business transaction, and the insurance company is a for-profit company. Then their objectives are not the same as yours. They want to pay as little as possible, and you want to collect as much as possible. So those are kind of the first steps that we help people take, is to take the right mindset about the situation and be practical, and then learn lessons from other people that have been there, and don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. You're going to get through it, but take some guidance from people who've been there, done that, and our organization is there for that purpose.
Right. And so, your insurance adjuster may be sympathetic and they may even be helpful, but they're still working for the insurance company at the end of the day, not working for you. So you have to keep that in mind. Right.
We just try to really give them the straight scoop, because without scaring them, it's a fine line, right? Telling people who've had something traumatic happen, we're here to make sure a second trauma doesn't happen. Because we hear a lot of people say that dealing with their insurance company was like a second nightmare. And so obviously, through our Roadmap to Recovery program, we try to prevent that from happening as much as we can. And one way that we do that is by having people get a realistic mindset about the dynamic, so that they don't get either rolled over by to take less than they're entitled to, or take an adversarial approach from the get-go that can also slow things down. So we just try to help people be realistic and strong, but have their eyes open so that they don't get taken advantage of.
Well, so there's probably two different scenarios for people who are dealing with the current fires. One is that you've been evacuated, but your home survives. And the other is you've been evacuated and your home doesn't. So there are maybe different things to think about if you're returning to a home that's still standing after an evacuation than there is if you're returning to a home with significant or complete damage.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, actually, it's harder to get through your recovery when you have a partial loss than a total, because with you've probably been seeing this in the news or hearing about it, that there's a lot of fighting between insurance companies and homeowners about smoke damage and about the insurance company's obligations to clean and all that sort of thing. And so, with a total loss, there's no question. Everything's gone. It's gone. So the only question is, how much would it cost to put it back? When people have had either smoke damage or partial losses, there's often delays and arguing over whether there's pre-existing damage or how expensive the damage is, or whether, how much it should cost to fix it. So yeah, very different. I mean, I think traumatic in both scenarios. Traumatic to have your home go down, obviously, and then also traumatic to deal with the partial, and there can be some complications there. But they're sort of two different communities in a way.
Two different communities of fire survivors, yeah.
Meaning what people call themselves standing homeowners, and then the total losses. Insurers treat them differently, and they experience the process differently in general. I mean, there's some commonalities. It always comes down to what was damaged or destroyed, and how much. What's the value? How much is it going to cost to put it back? Whether it's partial or total, those debates are similar, but the way that insurers approach the claims is slightly different.
So there are maybe some basic insurance claim tips we can give people. One of them I always hear is that you need to keep detailed records, not just of what you've lost, but also of every conversation you have with the insurance company. When it happened, how long you talked, what was the gist of the conversation?
Right. And we call that, and that is one of our fundamental tips, is start a diary, a journal, and keep track of your the daily events and who you talked to when and what they said, particularly with your insurance claim, just so that you can stay organized. Because, people, after they've gone through a disaster, they typically don't sleep well, and they don't think as clearly as they normally do for a couple months after it happens. So keeping that journal is practical on many levels.
And then there is something really interesting on your website, and there are so many resources there. We'll give everyone the website. But one of the things that was really useful, I thought, was the advice about agreeing on what you called a scope of loss with your insurance company. And this, I think, can apply across the board, but perhaps more with folks who have more significant damage. Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, that's a fancy way of saying what I was just talking about in terms of what was damaged and what's the value. So the scope is basically, what did this disaster do to this property, right? And then what's the cost of putting it back? And those are the our prescription, what we will say the best way to avoid or resolve a dispute on a claim is to present the insurance company with as much objective proof as you can gather of the value and the scope of your loss, so that instead of just being in the passive position where you wait for the insurance company to tell you what they owe you to put your house back, you tell them some third-party estimates that you've gotten, and that way the value and the extent of your loss is being fairly set, not just by some computer program that the adjuster wants to use to get in and get out.
Right, and if you do that, if you go through that process, then you're not going to be surprised by an estimate from the insurance company that is wildly different than what you thought your losses were.
Right, exactly. But what we're saying is try to get on the same page as much as possible with the insurance company about sizes, shapes, quality, and that's when we talk about a scope. We're talking about how big was the house, what was the flooring, and how many square yards of carpet, and all that. If you can get to an agreement with an insurance company on the scope, then it's easier to resolve any disagreements about pricing, because that way you can say, well, we agree that there's that the X amount of lumber is required. Then all we need to agree on then is how much it will cost to buy that lumber.
Right.
And if you can, the disputes between insurance companies and their customers on costs are so common. So the trying to reach an agreement on the scope is a good way to minimize those disputes over pricing.
So maybe one last question, and I don't know if you have an answer to this. It probably varies, but we frequently get asked, when should I get outside help? If the insurance company's adjuster comes back with something I don't agree with, do I need to hire someone else outside to do an estimate for me?
So not right away necessarily. We say give the insurance company a chance to do the right thing, but don't be a pushover. And there are sources of free help. Our organization, of course, being one of them, uphelp.org, and then the California Department of Insurance has a Consumer Services Bureau, and there are people there, and their job is, if you file a request for assistance with them, which you can do for free, and you can do it online or by phone, they can be a free source of helping. But there are, for a lot of people, if you're elderly or you are disabled or you have little kids and you work and you just don't have time, to put in to managing your own insurance claim after a disaster, then it's perfectly appropriate to hire what's called a public adjuster, as long as you do your research and you check their references, and they will stand in your shoes and deal with all the paperwork and all the meetings that you otherwise don't have time to or patience to deal with.
So Amy, I know you're always sponsoring events to give consumers more in-depth advice about particular aspects of the wildfire recovery process. Do you have anything coming up that people can sign up for?
We do. So we have already done 2 of our roadmap to recovery virtual workshops for the 2020 wildfire impacted households, and you can watch the recordings and listen by going to our website, uphelp.org, and then /2020 wildfires, and you can register to be on our mailing list and get notified of the next ones in the series. But we will be doing that for at least a full year, at least once a month.
Well, thanks for all the great tips, Amy, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Carmen. Keep up the great work.
Everyone, you can go to, as Amy said, uphelp.org for all of their fact sheets, and we'll be sharing some of the most important ones as well at consumerwatchdog.org. Thank you, everyone, for listening, chiming in, and remember, as always, to subscribe to the podcast at iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Carmen Balber, and thanks for listening.